King Charles had made his decision. And the moment word reached the right ears inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction was unlike anything senior courtiers had witnessed in years. In a move that bypassed every assumed hierarchy, every whispered arrangement, every carefully cultivated expectation built up over decades of proximity to the throne, he had placed Queen Elizabeth's most personal private estate directly into the hands of Catherine, Princess of Wales. Not Camila. Not the Parker Bowles circle. Not the people who had spent months quietly negotiating access and influence behind closed doors. There was no press release. No carefully managed announcement. No choreographed moment designed to soften the impact. That is not how King Charles operates when something truly matters to him. And this decision mattered in a way that went far beyond property lines or estate management. What Charles had done was simple in its execution and seismic in its consequences. He had designated Catherine as the custodian of one of Queen Elizabeth's most treasured private estates. Real authority. Real responsibility. The kind that comes with agricultural reports and conservation obligations and a weight of historical meaning that no document can fully capture. But the reason phones started ringing within hours, the reason senior courtiers who prided themselves on composure were suddenly struggling to maintain it, was not simply the decision itself. It was who had been passed over. There were people inside the orbit of this palace who had operated for months, in some cases considerably longer, under a set of assumptions about how this would go. Quiet assumptions. Privately discussed assumptions. The kind that never get written down precisely because everyone involved believes they don't need to be. The Parker Bowles circle had cultivated something over years of proximity to the throne. Not formal authority. They were always careful about that. But influence. Access. The kind of soft power that operates through private conversations and understood expectations and doors that open because of who you are connected to rather than what your title says. They had watched the estate exist in a kind of informal limbo since Queen Elizabeth's death and had drawn their own conclusions about where things were heading. They were wrong. Completely, irreversibly, publicly wrong. And the moment the confirmation reached them, the reaction was not measured. What makes this so significant is the nature of the property itself. This was not a commercial asset or an administrative convenience. Queen Elizabeth had used this estate the way few people in positions of extraordinary public pressure ever find a way to use any place, as somewhere she could simply exist. Every path, every garden, every room in the main house carried the imprint of her personal choices, her private preferences, her particular way of finding stillness inside an extraordinarily loud life. It was her sanctuary. And Charles had just handed the keys to the woman who will one day be Queen of England. Now here's where the story gets really interesting from a financial perspective. Because this wasn't just about a piece of land. This was about control of an empire worth hundreds of millions of pounds. The Duchy of Cornwall, which Charles inherited when he became king and then passed to William, is valued at more than £1.3 billion. It provides William with a private income of more than £20 million every year. And the Duchy of Lancaster, which Charles inherited from his mother, is worth approximately £650 million, delivering an annual surplus of around £24 million. These estates are exempt from a string of taxes, including capital gains tax, corporation tax, and inheritance tax. Under a deal negotiated in 1993, assets passed from one sovereign to the next are exempt from inheritance tax. The rules were drawn up to avoid wiping out the royals' private wealth in the event that a series of monarchs died in quick succession. If regular inheritance tax rules applied at 40%, Charles would have paid millions to the treasury. But the deal struck with John Major's government states that some royal assets are held by the monarch as sovereign rather than as a private individual, and it is therefore inappropriate for inheritance tax to be paid. But here's the part that Camilla's circle is furious about. The moment Charles dies, Camila loses far more than a husband. She was never an owner. She was a guest. The palaces, the vaults, the keys to doors only she can open, every one passes to Catherine. Buckingham Palace with its 775 rooms. Windsor Castle. The George IV diadem. The £86.3 million sovereign grant that covers royal expenses. The Tiara collection. The Gold State Coach. Sandringham. Balmoral. All of it moves to Catherine the day Charles stops breathing. Camila has spent years lobbying for position and access. She has even borrowed treasures like the Queen Mary's crown with its 2,200 diamonds. But she never owned any of it. She was always a guest. And guests eventually leave. The legal team that began reviewing the estate documentation was not looking for anything extraordinary. Their task was straightforward: to verify the procedural requirements for a private property transfer and to ensure that whatever Charles decided to do would be executed cleanly. And then someone opened the wrong file box. Or perhaps, depending on how you choose to interpret what followed, entirely the right one. What they found was not buried. It was simply unexamined. Sitting in the archive the way certain documents do when they have been placed somewhere deliberately by someone who trusted that the right person would find them at the right moment. A private addendum to the estate's existing documentation. Written not in the formal language of institutional procedure, but in something considerably more personal. The handwriting was Queen Elizabeth's own. The document did not read like a legal instrument, though it carried legal weight. It read like the considered words of a woman who had spent her entire adult life understanding exactly how the institution she led actually functioned. Not as it presented itself publicly, but as it operated in reality with all its informal pressures and quiet power struggles. She had seen this before. She had watched it play out across decades of royal life. And before she died, she had done something about it. The addendum laid out in precise and unambiguous terms her wishes regarding the long-term stewardship of her private estate. It did not simply express a preference. It established a condition that the estate be designated as a permanent sanctuary for the future of the crown, shielded from the claims of extended family connections or the influence of what she described with characteristic restraint as temporary court arrangements. She had not named Catherine directly. The document predated Catherine's title as Princess of Wales. But the description she had written of the qualities, the constitutional role, the particular kind of permanence required of whoever assumed this responsibility could only point to one person, the future Queen of England. The moment the story broke, the palace faced one of its most expensive and complex PR challenges in recent memory. The royal family's long-standing strategy of never complain, never explain, had to be abandoned. Camila's circle scrambled to control the narrative. 3 anonymously sourced briefings reached royal correspondents. The framing was consistent across all 3, the transfer was temporary, the restructuring was consensual, and all parties had agreed. But the palace had an official approved line. Camila's team now had 3 anonymous lines. The second royal correspondents placed them side by side. The gap was impossible to ignore. Who is telling the truth? Why do the versions not match? The questions started within 48 hours. And the answers destroyed what was left of the damage control strategy. International coverage added further layers of complexity. Commentators outside Britain, less constrained by the particular sensitivities of the domestic royal press, asked questions that British outlets were more cautious about framing directly. What did it mean for the long-term coherence of the monarchy that such a significant decision had been executed with so little visible consultation? What precedent did Queen Elizabeth's private addendum set for the relationship between a monarch's personal wishes and the institutional structures that were supposed to govern succession planning? The palace said nothing official, which was its own kind of statement. In the absence of any formal response, every silence became interpretable. Every unscheduled gap in the royal calendar attracted speculation. Every public appearance was scrutinized for evidence of the tensions that the official communications were so carefully declining to acknowledge. But the most damaging moment came when a photograph emerged of Anne holding the speech Camila had written for the Lancaster House state reception. Camila's words being delivered in another woman's voice. Serving the crown she could no longer officially represent. The image spread before the reception had even ended. By the following morning, it was on the front page of 3 national newspapers beneath a single headline, "The duty passes," but the words remain. It was not a press conference or a palace statement that gave the public the clearest picture of where things stood. It was a single public appearance. And what happened, or rather what did not happen, during it? The occasion itself was formal. Scheduled long in advance. choreographed with the kind of institutional precision that the British royal family has refined across generations of public performance. But nothing about what happened that day was simply what it appeared to be. Catherine moved through the engagement with the particular quality of self-possession that had become her most recognizable characteristic. Not performance. Not the managed warmth of someone working a room. Something quieter and considerably more assured. The composure of a person who has accepted a weight and is no longer uncertain about whether she can carry it. Those who observed her closely that day noted something different in how she occupied the space around her. Not larger, not more assertive, simply more settled, as though something that had previously required effort had become, almost without her noticing, entirely natural. Charles, positioned at the center of the proceedings as protocol demanded, moved with the deliberate calm of a man who has made a decision he believes in completely and is now simply living inside its consequences. He did not look like someone managing a crisis. He looked like someone who had resolved one. And then there was the moment that every camera in the room caught. It was not a confrontation. It was not a gesture of hostility or a visible act of defiance. It was something considerably more eloquent than either of those things, an absence. A space between two people that should, by every established expectation of royal protocol and personal history, have contained something warmer. A glance that did not quite land. An acknowledgement offered with the careful minimalism of someone doing the precise amount required by the occasion, and not a fraction more. In any other context, it would have registered as nothing. Unremarkable, unworthy of attention. But context is everything. And in the context of everything that had preceded it, the documents, the decisions, the private conversations, the archive discovery, the fury that had burned through certain palace offices like something that could not be contained, that absence spoke with the kind of clarity that fills entire chapters of history. The image held. The room understood. And no one said a word. 3 days after the Lancaster House reception, a note arrived. Not through official palace channels. Not delivered by a secretary or a courier. It arrived the way things arrive when someone has run out of institutional cover and has nothing left to hide behind. Handwritten on personal stationery. 2 sentences. No signature. The first sentence asked and to protect the charitable causes attached to the transferred duties. Specifically, 3 patronages connected to early childhood literacy programs that Camila had personally built over 11 years. Relationships she had cultivated from nothing. Causes she had shown up for quietly long before anyone was paying close attention. The second sentence said, "I will not interfere again." That is it. 2 sentences. No signature. No request for recognition. No suggestion of a timeline or a condition or a path back to anything. Just those 2 sentences on a piece of personal stationery. This is perhaps the most significant moment in the entire story. Not the transfer instrument. Not the email. Not the photograph. This? Because this is Camila in her own handwriting. With no institutional buffer. No communications team. No approved line. Acknowledging that it is over. Not the argument. Not the negotiation. Not the attempt to reverse any of it. She is not asking for the duties back. She is asking and to take care of what she built. And that is only something you write when you have genuinely understood that you have lost. Anne's response is so completely, perfectly, and that it defies explanation. She does not reply to the note directly. She does not send a handwritten response. She does not arrange a meeting or make a gesture. Instead, she sends a formal communication to the palace ceremonial office through official channels. On the record. Documented. Requesting that the 3 early childhood literacy patronages be flagged in her briefing materials as established legacy causes with the original steward listed as Her Majesty the Queen Consort. In plain English, she makes sure Camila's name stays attached to the work officially. In the palace record. Permanently. Nobody told her to do that. Nobody asked. It was not in the transfer instrument. It was not a condition of anything. And did it because Anne has spent 30 years inside this institution understanding one thing above everything else. The work is the point. not who holds the title attached to it. The work. Here's the truth that Camila's circle is still struggling to accept. Camila owns almost nothing. Ray Mill House. That's it. The £850,000 property she bought in 1996 after her divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles. She paid for it with her own money. She owned it before she married Charles. And it's the only thing that is truly hers. Everything else? Borrowed. Loaned. Temporary. The palaces belong to the crown. The tiaras belong to the royal collection. The jewels are crown property. The Duchy of Lancaster belongs to the sovereign, not the sovereign's spouse. The day Charles dies, Camila loses far more than a husband. She loses the world she lives inside. The estates. The vaults. The keys to doors only she can open. Everyone passes to Catherine. These rules were written long before Camila walked in. They have waited years for this day. This story was not about a seating card. It was not about one ceremony, one revised document, one authorization code used in a way it was never meant to be used. What this story was actually about was a question. The question every institution eventually has to answer when the people inside it stop being able to tell the difference between their own position and the purpose of the role they hold. The question is simple. What kind of authority is actually sustainable here? And the answer, the one Charles arrived at, that an embodied, and that Camila ultimately accepted in 2 sentences on a piece of personal stationery, is earned trust. Not proximity. Not access. Not years of visible struggle toward acceptance. Earned, demonstrable, documented trust. The kind that holds when things go wrong. Queen Elizabeth left behind an estate. But what she really left behind was a map of who could be trusted, of who understood what the crown actually means, and of how to protect something irreplaceable from the people who would turn it into something ordinary. Catherine now holds that map. And the people who are furious about it will spend years wondering whether the late Queen knew, long before any of them did, exactly how this story was going to end. What Elizabeth built in silence, William carries forward in silence. And for the first time in a very long time, the institution did exactly what it was supposed to. Subscribe to the Meghan Markle Report for more royal investigations. Drop your thoughts below. Was Charles right to bypass Camila? I read every single comment. See you in the next one.